Right here, guys. This is the book that you're looking for. If you have a family, if you have kids, you're trying to raise healthy kids, thriving children. We all want thriving children, right? This is the book right here, The Plant-Based Baby and Toddler. We're going to be talking to the author, Alex Caspero. Alex Caspero is coming on using the account Plant-Based Juniors. She also has her own account, but Plant-Based Juniors is the account of both Alex Caspero and Whitney English, who are the co-authors of this book, The Plant-Based Baby and Toddler, and we're about to... All right. Can't hear me. Turn up your sound. Can you guys hear me? Hey.
Hi, Will. How are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for all the love. Yes, we all want thriving, healthy children, right? That's the goal for, I think, every parent.
Exactly. And it's like you have a child, and it's the most beautiful, amazing love that you can ever experience in your lifetime. And you want to make sure that they grow up to be healthy humans, and the choices that we make as parents that do affect that, like in a very powerful way.
Yes.
So here we are. We have this book. Tell us about this book.
Yeah. So, just like you were saying, this book is really honestly what I wanted when I was pregnant with my son. I was so frustrated that I could not find an evidence-based, kind of credible, recently written book that went into all of my questions. I mean, you and I know this because we're friends, but I'm a nutrition nerd. Like, I just didn't want to know like surface area things. I really wanted to dig into what was going on and all the various questions I had. And I felt like my midwives couldn't answer that for me. My pediatrician really didn't know. And Whitney and I were like, okay, we both have multiple degrees in nutrition. And if we can't figure this out easily, other parents, I'm sure, are in the exact same boat. So we literally wrote the book that we wanted. And that's exactly what this is. We sort of brain dumped everything that we wish we knew about feeding kids and try to put it into one really easy to navigate resource.
And so did it start, like, was Plant-Based Juniors built for that same purpose first,
Exactly.
And then the book came later?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And when did you start that account? Because you guys have grown amazingly.
Yeah, so let's see. I had my son, so that was in 2018. And I remember Whitney and I had met like a decade ago. We were friends, and we were just like DMing all the time on Instagram, sharing various like stories and questions. And that's really, again, like the genesis of this. It was just like, okay, we wanted to put a place that was easy to navigate, but also evidence-based, because a lot of the books that we were finding, a lot of the accounts we were finding just didn't have solid, research behind them. So we kind of felt like we wanted to enter that space, really just saying like, this is the science. These are the things we know. These are the things that we don't know. And here's sort of the guidance that we have at this point to help you raise conscious kids.
Love it. Love it. Okay. We had a couple questions. And by the way, you guys, if you have questions, we're talking about The Plant-Based Baby and Toddler.
Yes.
Brand new book, came out on Tuesday. Okay. It's been out for 48 hours. And this book is incredible. And we're going to talk more about it. But if you have questions, drop them into the question box at the bottom. I saw someone who asked the question, where can I get this book? And the answer is quite simple. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's everywhere. So it's at all major retailers. It's also at your local bookstore. I just went down to my local store in St. Louis and picked up a few copies tonight for some friends. If you are international, it is you can grab it via Book Depository. I know they were having some issues keeping it in stock, but according to Avery, they are replenishing that. So if you see it that's out of stock, just keep checking. It should be there in the next few days or so.
Amazing. All right, so let's get into some of the details here, you guys, and again, drop questions that you have. But Alex, talk to me. So the book is titled The Plant-Based Baby and Toddler. What does plant-based mean?
Yeah, so we actually take a really inclusive stance when it comes to the term plant-based, right? We know that every single bit of plant-based eating is going to have some benefits, right? So whether you're fully vegan, whether you're vegetarian, whether you're just like, you know what, I keep hearing about these benefits of plant-based eating. I'm kind of on board, but I still, want to keep some of my animal products in my diet. Great, right? We know that 1 in 10 kids and adults gets enough produce. 1 in 10 gets enough fiber. Most of our diets, standard American diet, is really heavy in processed and ultra processed foods. And that's true with our kids too. So the more that we shift towards serving them more plants, we feel like the the benefits just continue to reap, especially as they get older, and all the benefits we know about chronic disease risk when it comes to adults and plant-rich diets. So
Amazing.
yeah, so we say plant-based baby and toddler. All of the nutrition information in this book is going to be applicable to really kids of all ages, right? We really wanted to dial in on the specifics that come with feeding babies and toddlers. So things like postpartum nutrition, things like breastfeeding, things like introducing solids, and then all of the behavioral challenges, right? Picky eating. How do I talk to my kids about food? How do I offer sweets? What is sort of this deal between structure and restriction? You know, all of these things that come into sort of those early feeding years. But really, if you have older kids, all of the nutrition is going to be the same. It just might have slightly different amounts based on their age as they get older.
Nice. Someone asked the question, how is it sort of structured, like from an age perspective?
Yeah, so the first chapter is nutrition, sort of for everything, right? We sort of dump in all of the nutrition that you want to know. And I do want to point out too, because I am a busy mom and I don't have time to read, you know, textbook after textbook. We try to make this as skimmable as possible. So we've got our text there, but then we also have these bottom lines, right? So this sort of book, we say, is for people who are like, yes, I want to nerd out and read, and also for people who are like, I've got 15 minutes to kind of figure out the big picture. Every single chapter has these quick bites and these sort of bottom lines. Then from there, we kind of break it up into meal planning, right? So a term that we like to say is, it's not nutrition unless it's eaten. So we really try to put in all of the things we talk about in chapter 1 into meal planning, meal prepping, how to actually get these foods on the table. And then chapter 3 is about first bites, right? Or first sips. So breastfeeding, postpartum, infancy concerns. After that, we go into sort of the 6 to 12 month range, talking about nutrition, but also starting solids, food allergies, feeding schedules, all of the sort of FAQs. And then chapter 5 and 6 is really sort of that plant-based baby and beyond, right? So again, we're talking about concerns you may have from 1 to 3, but then all of the other really behavior concerns, right? What do you do if your partner isn't plant-based? What do you do when your child goes to school or to daycare or is hanging out at, you know, the grandparents' house and perhaps they don't necessarily agree with what you're doing? So we really tried to answer all of the questions that we've gotten in the, you know, decade or so since we've been seeing clients, but also all of the questions our community members tell us every day in our DMs and our comments.
How many recipes do we have?
Oh, that's right. And there's recipes too. So we have 50 recipes. I know. I keep thinking this is like a nutrition book. It's also one part cookbook as well, right? Because we've got to talk about how do we introduce these foods in a really delicious and yummy way. If you guys know me, I love to cook. I mean, that's really my love language. So we try to incorporate as many family-friendly recipes as possible. There's a few that are sort of just for baby, but the majority of the recipes are really all about family meals, snacks, you know, things that the whole family can enjoy.
So plant-based diets for kids, kind of controversial. I mean, I don't think they're controversial, but some people like to pretend that they're controversial.
Yeah.
Is a plant-based diet a healthy diet for kids?
Yeah, so just so everyone's aware too, all of the major governing bodies, right? So things like the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Canadian Pediatric Association, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they all say that a well-planned plant-based diet is safe for all aspects of the lifestyle, right? Life cycle. So whether we're talking about pregnancy, infancy, toddlerhood, lactation, etc. The key is well planned, but that's true for any diet, right? Just because we're feeding our children, you know, chicken nuggets and McDonald's or whatever it may be, doesn't mean that diet's going to be well planned either, right? There's likely going to be a lot of nutrition deficiencies that are happening in any diet if you're not considering what types of foods you're actually feeding your children. So yes, well planned, that's what this book is. It's sort of the well planned part. But again, we want well planned diets for omnivores as well.
I mean, the expression well planned is required from these governing bodies when they're talking about making nutritional recommendations for kids. They would say well planned, like literally about any diet, and a well planned plant-based diet. Exactly. And a well planned plant-based diet is going to be better than a well planned junk food diet. It's going to be better than a well planned omnivore diet. It's going to be better than a well planned paleo diet, which restricts your kids.
Well, and it's also saying, you know, the types of foods we want to eat, right? So we know that most kids don't get enough fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, right? We're really saying that the well-planned part of it is not just saying, oh, okay, Oreos, crackers, chips, those are all vegan, all highly palatable, enjoyable for kids. No, it's saying we need to focus on the more nutrient-rich options, which again is true in every diet, right? I would say that regardless of who was sitting in front of me, if they asked me about dietary advice.
So what do you think about, because some people are asking some really good questions, and I
Oh,
think that these
good.
are very, very fair and valid questions. Alex, what do you think about concerns that are raised by the Weston A. Price
Uh,
Foundation?
Yeah, so the Western A. Price Foundation, it was essentially created by a dentist, right? And so they're very much and also
From 80 years ago,
from
from like
80
80 years ago.
and
Yep.
also based on observations, right? Not actually
Right.
based in clinical research. And there's a huge difference, right? So when we're talking about sort of the hierarchy of nutrition research, there are things like anecdotes, there are things like observations, and that would be all well and good if that's all that we had. But we have actual good clinical data and so much data, right? A
Right.
plethora of studies that talk about the actual benefits of a plant-based diet. So the Weston A. Price Foundation is really more into they call it like nourishing traditions, right? So it's a really heavy animal product diet, especially high in things like animal organ meats, high in animal fat. But
Right.
again, we know the science that those are not translated when it comes to actual health, right? When we look at studies done on plant-based kids, they have much lower BMIs than kids that are raised on animal-based or omnivore-based diets. They have a much healthier microbiome, right? Again, all that fiber that they're getting, which I know I'm talking to the king here about that. They're healthier overall, right? So they tend to have just better disease states as they continue to get older. They tend to eat more fruits, vegetables, have higher intakes of vitamin C and folate and all sort of the micronutrients compared to an omnivore diet. So I I appreciate what they've put out as far as like that's what they believe, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true and that's correct.
Right. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's not like that we have an absence of science at this point. 80 years ago, we did. We had an absence of
Yes,
science 80 years ago. Now we have a lot of science, and
a
science
lot of
is our
science.
tool. Yeah, and which is in this book, by the way. This is completely evidence-based. And, we should be using our science because that's our compass that points us towards better health outcomes for everyone, including our kids.
That's right. I
So,
mean, the Western and Price Foundation is really anti-soy, right? And again, we have, I mean, I think there's like 2,000 studies a year that are published on soy. So it's not like we
okay.
don't have the evidence. 80 years ago, yeah, right? A lot of observation, that's sort of how some science was done. We know so much more now, and it's just nothing that I take credibly.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, like when we're going to get into soy, for example, is like we have to be willing to discriminate between junk food soy,
Yeah.
right? Like some sort of soy nugget that's recreating chicken versus what is more of a whole food or minimally processed soy. Like for example, like talk to us about soy milk. What do you think about soy milk for kids?
Yeah, so let's back up just a quick second because I do want to set any fears about soy aside because I will say this is probably the number one question that Whitney and I get is soy safe, right? I remember my
Right.
pediatrician one time was like, "Oh, I think soy is kind of feminizing for men. Are you sure you want to give it to your boy?" So that is
I mean,
not
I got
true.
boobs, but that's
Yeah.
okay. I'm cool with it.
So soy is absolutely safe, right? The vast majority of the soy research shows it's not only safe, but it's also likely beneficial. The other thing that we know is that there are differences between animal studies when it comes to soy and human trials, right? Animals, rodents, non-primate humans all metabolize these isoflavones differently than adults do, than humans do, right? We also know that we have thousands and thousands of children who are on soy formula every year. And think about that. Soy formula, especially for the first 6 months or so, that's their only source of nutrition. We have such a concentrated source of these isoflavones, these phytoestrogens. If we were going to see concerns about soy or too much soy in the diet, we'd see it from the vast number of soy formula studies that we have. And that's not what we have, right? We know that kids who are on soy formula don't have any difference when it comes to thyroid health, reproductive health, various sexual issues, puberty. It's all the same as children who are raised on cow's milk formula. So soy is very, very safe. Soy milk.
Well,
Oh,
and the
go ahead.
irony, sorry to interrupt you, sorry to
No, I
interrupt you,
love
but
it.
but no, but the irony of all ironies is raising concern about phytoestrogens because just the word estrogen, I think, bothers people. Like they
Yeah.
can't they can't like understand that these are not exactly estrogen. This is phytoestrogen. It's very different.
Yeah.
But it's like kind of very ironic because then they argue in favor of replacing that with dairy,
With
which
dairy.
is completely pumped up with hormones, like
I
completely
mean,
pumped up with hormones.
well, and it's essentially, I mean, it's breast milk for a cow, right? I mean, we're
Right.
talking about estrogen and what that is. Yeah, it is very funny. And I do think it's because people hear this term phytoestrogens and they're like, I don't want excess estrogen. But really you have to understand too, phytoestrogens act much differently than estrogen. They're not estrogen. They're able to bind to different receptors in tissues, sort of turn on, turn off various functions. For instance, we know from various studies that girls especially, so prepubescent girls who have soy in the diet tend to have a lower rate of breast cancer. So that's one benefit. There's proposed sort of similar mechanisms for prostate health with boys. We don't have the firm data to say that we do the same way that we do with females. So, again, safe, healthy. You asked about soy milk. So yes, that's our preferred beverage of choice after 12 months. So from 0 to 12 months, really it's only supposed to be breast milk or formula, depending on what's working for you and for your children, for your baby. I do want to do one little quick caveat, and that is homemade formulas are not safe and appropriate. Non-dairy milk before 12 months is not safe and appropriate, and neither is any sort of toddler formula. So toddler formula is not nutritionally complete for an infant's needs. After 12 months, we love soy milk. Soy contains protein, it contains fat. It also contains the amino acid lysine, which can be a little bit more limiting on a plant-based diet. It contains choline, which is really great for cognitive development. It's one of the most rich sources of choline in a plant-based diet. So we love soy. If you can't tolerate soy, then pea milk is another great option. And we do like a fortified option just to help ensure that our kids are getting enough calcium.
Yeah, and someone raised, which I think is a valid concern. They said, their concern with soy is the traces of glyphosate. And I just want to say that if you buy organic, by definition, so the concern with soy is genetic modification of soy that is used in animal feed. And it's genetically modified so that it can be sprayed with glyphosate. But if you buy organic, like organic soy milk costs $2 where I live.
Yeah. Well, and I'll also say too, because I hear this a lot. They'll say things like, "Oh, most soy is GMO." Well, most soy is GMO because it's grown for animals. So the soy that's
Exactly.
actually in the supermarket, the majority of it actually is organic.
Right.
It's harder to find not organic soy milk and not organic tofu than it is
Right.
organic. So this sort of like 90% of all soy is genetically modified. Well, yeah, because 90% of all soy is actually raised to
It's animal
give
feed.
to animal feed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, guys, keep the questions coming. This is amazing. Okay, this book, if you have kids of any age, this is the book for you. If you're thinking about starting a family, this is the book for you. Grab it now. If you're going to a baby shower, this is the book to wrap up and get. No, I'm serious. This should.
Yeah. Yes.
You go into a baby shower, this is the book, The Plant-Based Baby and Toddler. This is Alex Caspero, one of the authors. Whitney English is one of the other authors. We're talking to her now. And I just think that this is such a needed book in the plant-based community. People need this book. So,
Thank you,
all
Will.
right, we've had some questions about supplements. Talk to us about supplements and kids.
Yeah, so we actually created in our book a create your own tear out supplement guide, because supplements should not be a four-letter word in the plant-based community. I'll also say that all diets are supplemented, right? Whether we're talking about
Exactly.
vitamin D that's added to cow's milk, vitamin A is added to all skim milk and cow's milk too.
Right.
Iodine actually is, so the major source of iodine in the standard American diet comes from dairy. It's not naturally there. It's there because we sterilize the udders. We sterilize the milk equipment with an iodized-based solution, and that's how it gets into the milk. So, we're talking about supplementing
That's pleasant.
things. I know it's gross when you think about it, but it's true, right? Or seafood, but most babies and toddlers are not eating like oysters and clams, right? So
Right.
it's dairy is the best source of iodine, vitamin D, et cetera. So I say that because supplements, I think sometimes people are like, oh, it must not be natural. Well, all diets are supplemented in some ways, and we don't live natural lives, right? Once upon a time, we were outside, we were naked, we were getting vitamin D from the sun. life has changed a lot. We wear sunscreen, we clothe our children, we're indoors. So B12.
We were also living to like a life expectancy of 26 back then.
Exactly. So no need to fear supplements. So our Create Your Own Supplement Guide is in the back of the book. That way you can figure out like, okay, this is what my child's eating. We make it really easy for you to figure this out. This is their age. This is what we recommend. From 0 to 12 months, vitamin D for all exclusively breastfed babies, 400 IUs. You can buy this in like liquid drops and just place it in baby's mouth, or you can rub some on your nipple if you're breastfeeding, or on your finger and give it to baby. From 12 months on, we do recommend baby has their own source of B12 once they're weaned. We also recommend continuing up that vitamin D. We usually recommend about half the RDA of iodine, and that's because we also want to limit salt. And so we don't want to be relying only on like iodized salt to get enough of that iodine for young children. And then the other thing we do recommend up till about age 2 is DHA. So DHA, very long chain fatty acid. We are able to convert ALA to DHA, but that conversion is really low, really low in young children. It's almost absent in infancy. In breastfeeding and in pregnancy, only preformed DHA is able to cross over to the fetus or through breast milk. So we recommend mom supplement with DHA then. After about age 2, the results are really mixed. So if you want to continue supplementing DHA, awesome. The only really downside is cost. But until age 2, we do have sort of known benefits when it comes to cognition and retinal development, and we recommend DHA. One last thing on DHA I want to say is that people say things to us like, oh, well, I'll just feed my kids fish. So DHA is not found in all fish, and most of the fish that kids are actually eating are things like fish sticks, right? Fish that does not actually contain high levels of DHA anyways, and fish also comes with things like mercury and dioxins and other sorts of environmental toxins. One of the benefits of a plant-rich diet is the fact that the toxin load is actually fairly low. When we test plant-based breast milk, we see that it only has about 1 to 2% of the environmental toxins compared to omnivore women. So lots of things to consider, but that's my quick supplement spiel.
All right, someone is asking, buying on Amazon now, is there a preferred method to buy it over Amazon? Any thoughts? Like, should they buy local if they have the chance to?
I love supporting local with lots of things. Don't get me wrong. I buy a lot of things on Amazon too. I try hard to support local just because that aligns with what I like to do. So, you know, I know Amazon's quick and it gets there fast. If you can get local, awesome. If not, you know, we get it. Amazon's there.
How about digital? Is it available digital?
Yes, it is. And it's also available as an audiobook.
Awesome. All right, cool. So talk to us about Pb3. What's that?
Oh, the Pb3 Plate. So if you're listening to me and being like, oh my gosh, this sounds like I have to have a degree in nutrition to feed my kids. No, you do not. So we created something called the Pb3 Plate. Let me try if I can see if I can find it. It's sort of this visual guide, right? I love plate models because I think they're really easy for parents, there you go, to see it and to be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So we also created this to be a tear out. So you can literally tear it out and place it on your fridge when you go to feed your kids.
Oh man, I love that.
It has 3 main sections. So, you know, plant foods are really combinations of macronutrients. So it wouldn't make sense for us to say things like, make sure you get, you know, this many servings of protein, this many servings of fat or carbs. If you're serving a bean, it's going to be like, oh my gosh, okay, well, there's protein and carbs. That doesn't work. So we instead talk about food groups, right? So food items. So a third of the plate is fruits and vegetables. A third of the plate is grains and starches, and a third of the plate is legumes, nuts, and seeds. If you're serving most meals and snacks and sort of picking one from each, you're going to solve the vast majority of the nutrients that we'd want to get in when it comes to growing kids, right? So fruits and vegetables, a third, grains and starches, a third, legumes, nuts, and seeds, a third. We also focus in the center of the plate on iron and fat. That's because plant-based diets, one of the benefits of them for adults is the fact they tend to be so low in fat, right? Plant foods, most of them are actually very low in fat, very low in saturated fat. Kids need a lot more. So from about infancy to young toddlerhood, they need about 35 to 40% of their calories from fat. even after about age 3, it only drops down to about 30% calories from fat. So we want to make sure that we're giving them an abundance of healthy fats in the diet. Iron is also the most common nutrient deficiency when we're talking about any kid, right? So plant-based or omnivore. Omnivore kids tend to be actually at a higher risk because they tend to drink a lot more cow's milk, and calcium and iron compete for absorption, and calcium wins. So those are the things that we really like to call out. In our sort of other plate, we have things like a soy milk on the sides and supplements. Anyways, it's very cute, and it tries to make it very, very easy. And for example, if you're serving, let's say, pasta one night, and it's got, you know, your whole grain pasta, maybe some spaghetti sauce, that's that vitamin C, that veggie, then you can look at this and be like, okay, I need to offer some sort of legumes, nuts, and seeds. Maybe I'll do some sprinkle of hemp seeds. Maybe I'll add a serving of tofu on the side, right? So it's really sort of just kind of making meal plan as easy as possible.
Nice. Love that. And that's one of the chapters. That's the second chapter, third chapter?
That is the second chapter. Yep.
Nice. Perfect. All right. Let's talk about picky kids, picky eating kids. So maybe you could tell us what tips you have, and you guys, for the 163 people who are here, drop some tips into the comment box too. Like, what do you do with your kids when they're picky? So Alex, go ahead and take that.
Yeah, so picky eating is really, really common, right? I mean, even with the best of intentions, picky eating, a lot of it is related to sort of the autonomy that our children start to develop around 18 months or so, right? They're beginning to really come into their own, and they want to decide, hey, I want to put this food in my body, or I don't, or this is what I like. Those are all things we should celebrate, right? They're deciding to sort of let us know their preferences and their choices, but that can be a battle sometimes when it comes to picky eating and what we want our kids to eat versus what they want to eat. What we say our sort of like overarching theme is offer without pressure. So what that means is it is our job as parents to offer the foods to our kids, right? So it's my job to offer foods, and it's my child's job to really decide whether or if not they want to eat it and how much. Because what we don't want to do is sit them down and say, you must eat your broccoli before you leave the table. That's going to be a really negative experience. And it's also going to teach our kids that they have to eat broccoli as like this punishment, and therefore, you know, it's sort of a bad negative food. Research shows that makes picky eating a lot worse. The more that we turn it into sort of these behavioral battles, it likely backfires on us. Instead, if we say, here's dinner tonight, here's some pasta, here's some broccoli, here's some tofu, eat what you want, then they get to decide, okay, and if all they eat for dinner that night is pasta, that's okay too. Nutrition is a long game, right? It is our job to continuously offer these foods to kids so they become used to them, so it feels like it's part of like the family culture, the food culture that they have. But it may take a dozen times, it may take 2 years for them to accept a food, and that's okay. The other thing I will say about this too is there's lots of ways to do food exposure. So people are talking about in the comments, like meal planning, meal prep with them, having them go grocery shopping with them. Yes, those are all exposure points, right? When my child is next to me in his kitchen helper tearing kale for the smoothie, that's awesome. If he eats this kale too, that's great too. But at least he's seen that this is a food. He's familiar with it. He's using his senses to sort of bring it into his normal food exposure. These are all really, really good things.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I want to read some of the comments that people made because I think people made a lot of great comments here. So talked about like creating muffins that have spinach and carrots in them. They talked about hiding veggies in smoothies. I mean, smoothies are delicious. Like
smoothies
kids love
awesome.
smoothies.
Can I talk about hiding veggies for a hot
Sure.
second? Okay.
So
there's a difference between hiding veggies. So we do a ton of smoothies in my family too. I love that tip. We do a lot of muffins. We have a recipe for a kale muffin in the book. We also want to make sure that we don't feel like we're tricking our kids, right? So what that means is if I'm putting kale in my smoothie, I'll tell my son like, oh, let's put some kale in this smoothie. Even if it's blended up and he doesn't necessarily taste it, that's great, right? That's a benefit. But what I don't want to do is give him that smoothie, have him take a sip, and then be like, aha, I got you. There's kale in it. That feels really tricky to our kid, and that can lead them not to trust us when it comes to what kinds of foods that we're offering them. So we always want to have sort of this open trust with them. We never want our kids to feel like we're trying to manipulate them for eating. Again, that's likely going to backfire and cause more issues down the road.
Yeah. And we've had some people too who are talking about getting the kids into the kitchen, which I think is always a great, like
Yes,
get your
love
kids
it.
involved. Kids really love that. Gamifying stuff, like make
Yes.
it fun. We actually, like my kids are a little bit older, but plant points and counting plant diversity and having challenges against one another.
It's
That's stuff that
fun.
we'll do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
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 fun.
it's all about food play, right? Like my son is not like peppers in any form, but we will have like a crunch contest. He will like sit there and crunch it. He doesn't actually eat it, but great, right? Those are all ways to make food a fun game. When he was going through like a weird broccoli phase, I'd bring the broccoli out. He loves trucks. And so we were doing like dump trucks, scooping up the broccoli trees and like moving them around the house. Like that's all really fun things for kids. And there's no pressure to eat the food that way too, so it feels more comfortable.
Nice. And one of the things that I've noticed, I mean, tell me how this works, Alex, is that like I've noticed with my own kids as they've grown up that when they're really young, like, what's described in this book, up through toddlers, I've noticed that sometimes their interest in food ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
There's times where they're like devouring everything in sight, which I assume is when they're in a growth spurt. And then there's times where they're just like really not that interested in food and you can't get them to do it. And the approach that we've always taken is to like kind of empower them to, I mean, we're not going to force food down their throat, I guess
Yes.
is what I'm trying to
Yes.
say. But what are your thoughts about all that?
Yeah, we're all born with these really beautifully innate senses of how much food we need, right? So those messages kind of get twisted as we grow up through diet culture, as we're exposed to, perhaps like clean plate clubs or the parents say like eat all of this or, all of those things sort of override that natural hunger and fullness. So yes, I love that. I want my son to let me know how much food he needs. And hey, that also means that some nights for dinner, he may just have 5 strawberries. And again, that is okay, right? We're talking about long-term picture here. As long as your child is growing according to their growth chart, and there's not sort of any big jumps either way. If your child is going through a period of time where he's just not that hungry or not eating like he used to, I would trust that, especially if there's other times when he eats in abundance and he eats a lot. Great, right? Trust that too. We don't want to tell kids to eat more, and we also don't want to say, ooh, that's too much food. I need you to stop eating right now. You've had enough, right? Again, trusting kids to sort of understand what their fullness and hunger cues look like. And we go into a lot of that in the book because there's other like structures you want to put in place to help them really sort of like cultivate this.
Nice. We have a good question here that someone asked. I'm gonna let this pop up here. Here we go. I have an 11-month-old boy that wants to eat constantly. He is fully plant-based, still having breast milk 3 to 4 days, 3 to 4 times a day. You can't see the bottom, but here's the question. Any pointers for keeping a big eater full? We're talking about an 11-month-old.
Yeah. So a few things I would say is one, I'd be curious to know sort of how the feeds are, right? So if baby is sitting down to eat, is he overly hungry, right? Does he need other things, with the diet? Because sometimes breastfeeding or formula feeding can really interact with sort of the appetite. If we're feeding them too close to meal time, they might eat enough, and if we're waiting too long, they might be overly hungry. Fiber is wonderful. Actually, it's interestingly enough because a lot of times we talk to parents about actually decreasing sometimes the fiber in plant-based foods because it can be so filling for young bellies, and therefore, they can sometimes not eat enough or feel like they're getting too full and not eat all the food that they actually need to. But I would look at what you're eating your child, feeding your child. So is it a lot of fruits and vegetables? Or are we offering in some more of those more nutrient-rich things as well, right? So again, that like legumes, nuts, and seeds portion, that grains and starches, really trying to round out that plate. That'd be my first sort of line of defense to figure out what they're eating and to ensure that it's nutritionally complete.
So what foods do you start with at 6 months of age?
Yeah, I start with whatever I'm eating, right? So we love this idea called baby-led weaning. And it's essentially this concept that you are serving your children, your baby, the same food that you eat for the most part in a safe and appropriate way. So it doesn't mean I'm giving my baby, a hunk of grapes. It means I am serving food that they are able to pick up at 6 months with that kind of palmar grasp, things that are going to be safe for them to put into their mouth, that they're able to gum with their mouth and swallow and chew. So for my kids, it really differed, right? My son, We did, I think, like sweet potato sticks in the beginning, avocado, a lot of tofu, again, focusing on that iron-rich and vitamin C-rich food pairings. My daughter honestly got a lot more of sort of like our food just because she's the second child. And it was like, well, I'm not making anything separately or fun for you. So you're pretty much getting what we're all getting. But one of our first meals was a curry. You know, I mixed it with rice. It was thick enough for her to kind of pick up with her hands and chew. So there's no need to limit or think that kids can't have fun with flavor, right? You know, we're able to put in all the different spices and not hot spice, but actual spice flavor with
Right.
our children and allow them to experience those things. I think one of the coolest things about sort of this early feeding period is that we're introducing our kids, yes, to taste, to texture, to various foods, but also to all these different flavors, right? Food is flavorful. There's no need to do sort of the bland baby food approach.
When do you think, this is just me, I'm just curious what you think about this. When do you think where do babies' taste buds come from? What do you think?
Where they come from, I don't know where they
Yeah.
come from, but I know that we are predisposed to really like sweet foods, right? So breast milk, if anyone's ever tried it, it's very, very sweet. You know, I think as we were sort of evolving, right, crawling around in our caves, we were trying to program ourselves to enjoy sweet foods because we knew those were likely safe foods. The bitter foods were likely more poisonous. And we know this is true for babies too, right? So up until about 4 months, 6, 7 months, babies have a really strong preference for sweet foods. It's also the time where they tend to be also a little bit more accepting of perhaps some of those bitter foods before some of those really strong like taste preferences take hold. So that's why we
Hmm.
say in that 5, 6, 7 month range, yes, offer whatever you want. Also make sure you're offering a lot of vegetables, those bitter flavors, so babies can adapt and start to like them.
Nice. How about sugar? How about sugar? Like not so much with 6-month-olds, but like let's talk more about toddlers and
Yeah.
sugar. What are your thoughts?
So I would say if you can, avoid introducing as long as possible, right? We all like sweets. Again, we're biologically programmed to like sweets. Someone asked about salt. Salt is actually more of a learned taste, right? We're not programmed to like salt. We all like sweet. So we don't need to introduce these foods early to kids. They're going to like them, right? At some point, your child starts to become aware that perhaps your food isn't necessarily the same food that their friends are having or that is served at daycare or play dates or birthday parties or whatever. We go into a lot of this in the book, this idea of structure versus restriction. And that's the concept that if we restrict our kids, right? So if we say things like you're absolutely not allowed to have that, you cannot have that, it usually backfires. Research shows that it makes that thing more exciting, right? Think about any time we've been told you can't have that. I don't know about
That's
you.
exactly what I want.
Yeah, I mean, I want that like so much more, right? My poor parents.
Right.
So the more that we tell them, no, you can't, it makes it more exciting. And also remember too, we don't do the same thing with other foods, right? It puts these different items on a pedestal and it just creates a really sort of unhealthy comparison with
Yep.
things. The other thing I will say to parents is really as much as we can, trying to limit words like good or bad, right? When we tell
Mm.
our kids this is a good food or this is a bad food, they can start to internalize that. And again, these are young kids, right? They don't have the ability to understand that we don't necessarily say that they're bad. They're not bad for wanting to eat it, or they're not necessarily good or virtuous if they eat it too, right? So really trying to sort of like take all those labels out, neutralize as much as possible, and just say, this is our food. This is how you enjoy it. Sometimes at my house, I give my child, my almost 4-year-old, a cookie with his dinner. And that's because I want him to learn that that food isn't super, super exciting. It isn't this huge event, right? It's just something that he wants to eat one day. Great, we have it sometimes. And he also knows when I do give it to him, he doesn't have to binge it because at some point he's going to see that food again, right? The more that we restrict these foods, our kids think like, oh gosh, this is great. Mom never does this. I'm going to eat as much as we can. And again, we're talking about those hunger, those fullness cues, which sort of overrides that natural desires.
Nice. How about breast milk? Let's talk about breast milk and like talk to us. So, all right, before we jump into breast milk, like of course the thing about breastfeeding is that it's not possible for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing that we would ever want is people like I know people want to,
Sure.
and sometimes it's just not in the cards. But taking that sort of aspect out of it and just kind of speaking to, for people who are able to breast milk and they want to breastfeed and they want to breastfeed their children, talk to us about like sort of the path after 6 months. What do you do? How long do you continue? I mean, I'll tell you what we did in our family if you want at some point, but
Yeah, I
just
would love to.
talk to us about that.
Yeah, so you can breastfeed as long as you like, right? There, if it's working for you and it's working for baby, that's awesome. Here in the United States, the recommendation is until 1 year of age. That's sort of the minimum requirement, whether that's breast milk or formula, depending on what's going on. Like you mentioned, we have such a little lack of support for breastfeeding mothers. And so many women, even if they wanted to breastfeed that long, perhaps can't because of all the other issues they have to deal with when it comes to raising kids.
Right.
But the World Health Organization says until at least 2, right? So if you want to go beyond 1 year, that's awesome. What we want to do, though, around about 6 months or so is make sure we're introducing what we call complementary foods. This is that period of time from 6 months to 12 months when baby's going to be getting most of their nutrition from breast milk, but also able to be introduced to the various allergens that we know we want to, introduce at least some of them early and often, getting used to those flavors, getting used to those textures, right? All the things that food has, and offering a source of iron-rich foods because breast milk is amazing, but it's fairly low in iron. The iron it does have is really bioavailable, but that's because iron stores are built up in utero, and that lasts until about 4 to 6 months, depending on when the baby was born, if you did any sort of like delayed cord clamping, blood loss during the delivery, etc. But usually about 4 to 6 months is when baby has their own iron stores from mama. And then from there, they need to get their own from complementary foods.
Nice. Love that. Yeah. So in our house, so first of all, I'm a huge fan of breastfeeding for our kids for as long as possible. And what I dig about it is that breast milk, human breast milk, I think is like the perfect food. I mean, it was evolved for this purpose. And it's fascinating to think about, that like, for example, I know you've heard me say this before, Alex, that human breast milk has over 200 varieties of what we call human milk oligosaccharides, which have zero nutritional value to the child, yet are designed to feed the developing gut microbiome of the child. Not to mention the other immune benefits that breast milk brings with it. So it's just balanced nutrition. Now, like in our house, our kids, we introduced food around 6 months, and we expanded their diet over time. Human breast milk was no longer like the primary source of their nutrition from that point forward. But what my wife did, depending on what was going on, they either would continue to nurse on some level, or she pumped, and she built up a store in the freezer. And until they were age 2, my kids still got some breast milk. Like sometimes it would be mixed with other, like soy milk, for example, in a bottle. But they at least got some breast milk up until age 2. And I'm just, look, it's anecdotal. I know it's just anecdotal.
It's amazing. And go Val, because pumping is a pain in the butt. So she was able to do that long. Even more kudos to her.
And my kids between the two of them are like almost 12 years of age. My daughter's 7, my son's 4, and they've never had antibiotics. And it's not because I'm like against antibiotics. If my kids needed antibiotics, I would give it to them, but they've just never needed them. And I just think I'm like completely convinced that this is part of the reason why.
I mean, it's really sort of the 2 methods, right? So we're designed, and I mean, this probably a lot better than I do, but to sort of seed our microbiome through that vaginal delivery, if that's possible, and then also through breast milk, right? That's really how we're designed to get as many of those amazing sort of gut bugs right from the beginning, and then continuously through at least that first year of life. So breast milk is amazing, and also for probably reasons that we still don't even understand. I mean, there's so many things that we're learning about breast milk that is just, it's incredible, right? And it really can't be replicated in the exact same way. But I also want to say formula is very safe. It's very well studied. So you can also feel fine if that's what you need to do for your child.
Do you have a recommended formula?
So the only two options currently on the market for those under 12 months is either going to be a soy-based formula or a cow's milk-based formula. There's no other option for those under 12 months. Yes, I know there are toddler formulas, but again, those are not nutritionally complete for infancy. Sometimes people will look at that soy-based formula, and this is going to be the only plant-based option out there, and see things like added sweeteners and say, oh gosh, I want a clean option. Well, the reality is that a soybean does not naturally contain enough of the lactose, enough of the sugar that human milk does in order to mimic it. So we have got to add in various kinds of oils and fats, again, to mimic human breast milk. We also have to add in other sweeteners because the soy carbohydrate is not going to be absorbed the same way and the same need and the same levels as human breast milk. So I know that can feel kind of scary when you look at it, but please trust it is well studied, it is safe, and again, it's the only option, right? We've got one or two options here, either soy or cows. And I will also say we have a lot of vegan moms and parents who say things like, soy formula didn't work for my child, I chose to go with the cow's milk as well. That is okay, right? Again, we're down to two choices here. So if one doesn't work, you kind of have the other option. It does not mean that after 12 months, you can't switch or try back a soy milk to see if that's better for baby.
All right, talk to us about the recipes. So you said there's about 50 recipes. What's the scoop?
Yes, there's 50 recipes because again, like, it's not nutrition unless it's eaten. You know, we can sit here and wax poetically all day long about the benefits of chia seeds and hemp seeds and kale and beans and tofu, but if your child's not going to eat it, it doesn't really matter. So all of the recipes are really designed to be as family friendly as possible. One of my absolute favorite meals is my 15-minute black bean tacos, or our 15-minute black bean tacos. We eat these in my house probably like twice a week. Sometimes it's black beans, sometimes it's pinto beans, sometimes it's lentils. My son loves taco night. I mean, he loves tacos. So, and this meal gets on the table in 15 minutes. It uses canned beans. It's really great. We've got all different kinds of snacks, so different kinds of energy balls. We have sort of homemade granola bars, you know, different kinds of snacks perhaps you'd want to take to preschool or to daycare. And again, all of the recipes are going to be in line with things that we're talking about for kids. So very minimally sweetened, no added sugars if they're designed for kids under age 2. After that, very, very minimally slow. We try to sweeten as much as we can with fruit. And then also very low in salt because kids up until age 12 months really don't need a lot of extra salt. And then even from them, we kind of want to limit it as much as possible.
Perfect. Love it. All right. So guys, the plant-based baby and toddler.
Yes.
Grab this book. All major sellers, Amazon, your local bookstore. You can get the Kindle version. You can get the paperback copy, which I have in my hand and I love. All right. This is for parents. This is for kids past age 3.
Yeah.
This is for baby showers, as I said before.
And any caregiver. You know, we're hearing from people who are like, I am passive aggressively giving this to my in-laws or to my doctor or whoever you feel like would perhaps benefit from some of the information in here.
And the other thing, for the people who were not here in the very beginning, talk to us one last time. Plant-based, like, talk to us about the inclusiveness of this. This is not restrictive. This is inclusive.
Yeah. So we again, the benefits of a plant-rich diet, right? Whether we're talking about, again, veganism, predominantly plant-based, vegetarian, flexitarian, great, right? There are so many benefits to kids eating more plants, and we don't feel like it's a benefit if we come out and say it's got to be 100% or nothing, right? There are so many factors when it comes to feeding kids. You're not always in control all the time, right? Your kids are in control sometimes too. Other caregivers, daycare concerns, you know, there's a lot of issues. So I don't want anyone to feel like 100% has to be the goal. It's not. Again, we're talking about most kids, 1 in 10 get enough fruits and vegetables every single day. So even if we're moving to, 40% plant-based, I mean, that's still going to have incredible benefits. So we're really a very, very inclusive community over at Plant-Based Juniors. Our job is to help you get more plants on the plate more often.
More plants on the plate more often is a very reasonable goal. It is a goal that every single parent should have, regardless of what your dietary preference is. This is not being about exclusively plant-based if you don't want to be. If you want to be, then by all means you should.
Yes.
But
we've got the resource for you. And one last thing I will say too is that it's not just about human health. it's about planetary health as well. I'm sure every parent that is listening to this is concerned, is alarmed about the world that we are leaving our children, and switching to a more plant-rich diet makes huge strides against that. So, you know, when I think about things, my recommendations is always like, okay, I need to be concerned about human health, yes, of course, but also planetary health. And the beauty about plant-rich diets is they go hand in hand.
Yeah, exactly. It's wonderfully aligned. You can actually have that win-win-win.
Yes,
And your kids are the ones who actually ultimately reap the biggest reward.
that's right.
So, all right, cool. Alex, thank you so much, you
Thank
guys.
you. I adore talking with you. This is so fun. Thank you, everybody.
Grab this, the plant-based baby and toddler. It's amazing. You're absolutely gonna love it. I see a ton of people who are pre-ordering or
Awesome.
ordering.
Thank you.
So I love that. And grab your copy now. Follow Plant-Based Juniors, and I will talk to you guys soon. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Phil.
I'll see ya.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.